right, Aftershocks, Tremors, Matt and Chris, we're back here with you guys for another discussion episode where we talk all things music business. And today on this episode, we're pleased to have with us a veteran in the business who's had a great, great success both on stage and behind the scenes in the studio. These days, he's really well known for being one of Jerry Cantrell's main studio hands, and we'd like to welcome to the show Grammy-nominated engineer Mr. Paul Fig is with us. What's up, Paul? Thanks for coming on. How are you?
Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, thanks for having me on too.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, well, thanks for coming on. Paul, just to get things kicking off here, when I was, made aware of your extensive studio resume, obviously very impressive, and we're going to get to talking about a lot of the work you've done over the years. But I was just as excited to talk to you, too, about your previous career as a touring musician. A lot of 90s metal fans would remember that you were one of the guitarists for a great band out of LA back in the 90s and early 2000s called Amen. Band that was really, a highly revered band among a lot of the metal fans and journalists, especially. I mean, you guys obviously were, one of the Ross Robinson bands at that time on his label.
Yeah.
And Amen just always fascinated me. Just to, we'll start talking about Amen before, to kick things off here, because like I mentioned, you guys were really well respected in the metal press, but for some reason it didn't necessarily translate into a huge following here in the States. I know you guys did really well overseas. But that self-titled record on Roadrunner and the third album, We've Come For Your Parents, man, those are just great records, both on major labels. The only thing I could think of why you guys never really took off like I thought you should have was because you guys were really such a unique band that I think probably the labels didn't even know what to do with you at that time, because it was really, you guys weren't like those other Ross Robinson bands like Limp Bizkit and Korn. I mean, you guys were pretty much the antithesis to that. I mean, why do you think, just talk a little bit about the Amen days. Let's start with that. I mean, why do you think the band was never really able to really break through here in the States the way that I think many people thought the band should have really?
Well, okay, so, I joined the band in 94 and, we went through a pile of drummers, but, it's like the LA scene back then, the scene was dwindling and, Korn was playing a lot and, it's like, gosh, they're so heavy. But, when I joined Amen, it was a totally different type of angle. The energy was way more blistering and like in your face rather than like kind of like this, more hip hop or new metal. And it was really hard for us to find shows. So, we played with all sorts of weird bands, but we played all these like, little dives and, I don't know if anybody heard of the Slave record.
The first record, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The self-titled, well, not Slave, it was the first record Casey put out through Ton Records. And I think Ross was involved in that one as well. But that is just really, it's, somebody called it dirty biker rock, but it was, it was just really heavy in your face and kind of punk, in a way.
Yeah.
And, Ross was a huge friend of Casey. And, finally when we got, we found Shannon Larkin and he stepped in, things really started to happen. And, Sonny joined. And then after Lynn Strait passed, we got Tumor. And then, we already signed the deal and we were already, about to hit the road. But yeah, it was just tough to find our audience because the people really thought our angle was refreshing. It was, just a lot of high energy, kind of like, just think Stooges, but with lots more distortion.
Right. Yeah. No, you guys definitely had like a punk sort of a hardcore punk type of a vibe to you. And like I said, yeah, I mean, and you were saying at that point, it was really all the hip hop influences and you guys definitely stood out. But like I said, yeah, it was definitely, I guess, difficult to really kind of, get that, fan base because like you said, you were so in your face and different. You weren't radio friendly like those other bands were.
Not at all. Yeah. So, the music is one thing. And then seeing the band live made the record sound boring. So if you got to see it live, you most likely became a fan or you hated it. So,
right. Well, I know it's true. And the first time I did see you guys live, that's really, I mean, I had the records, but it was really when I saw you guys live, I saw you at the Tattoo the Earth festival, that tour out there in San Bernardino. That was just such a super hot day. And I remember,
oh my God,
right, it was brutal. And I remember you guys came on to be, you were really the first band to get people moving because it was so hot and so whatever. But when you guys came out there, things started picking up after that. You know what I mean? It was, you guys really definitely got that show kicking off. I mean, that tour, it's funny because we're going to be interviewing Scott Alderman tomorrow about that tour. Talk a little bit about the experience in that Crazy Tour, because I remember Shannon Larkin, I think I remember reading him doing an interview. He was saying that it was the most debaucherous tour that he'd ever been a part of up until that time. And he obviously is, played with everybody, Shannon.
Yeah. So I remember that show vividly. It was the hottest day. And, everybody on that side stage got to, we were cycling around until we got to headline that side stage. And that night in San Bernardino was like the last night, or the second to last night of Tattoo the Earth. And it was just so brutally hot. Like we were just like in our broken down bus with the air conditioner barely working, and everybody who we knew who were on the list were like trying to escape the heat and coming onto the bus, and we're like, they were just bringing the heat with them. We're like, no more people. And we're just laying around in our underwear, just like trying to reserve our energy for the show. And I think we went on like at 6, and right before Slayer was going to do their thing across the way, and it was just so hot. And I remember, all these water bottles, like, were flying up in the air, and, one landed right in my amp and took my tubes out. My guitar tech is like, what do I do? I'm like, well, go get the spare tubes. But, just silliness. But that was a great show.
Yeah. Great show.
Sure.
Yeah.
No question. Well, Paul, do you think that part of the deal with Amen not getting as far as you probably was, I'm sure you wanted it to go, was just the fact that was Roadrunner at their money spending most, and they just didn't have enough money to spend or to throw around? I mean, they obviously had huge bands, whether it was Sepultura or Soulfly or Slipknot or but then they even had even the smaller bands were still doing pretty well, the Spine Shanks of the world and whatnot. All of that happened all at one time, and that's right when you came out. There just wasn't enough money to put around to help a band like yours get out there.
I don't buy that for 2 seconds, because we left Roadrunner because there was a situation where there were some business decisions made and they didn't like it, and so they didn't want to pay tour support to get us to Europe. It was like going to be a Machine Head Slipknot tour all over UK and Ireland, and they didn't want to do it. So, they breached their contract. We were able to get out. Virgin picked us up.
Okay.
So that was for, they picked up our next record, and that was We Come For Your Parents. And they spent $2 million marketing that record.
Wow.
So I don't believe that there wasn't enough money. It was, you can't shove that kind of abrasive material at everybody and expect them to love it. There has to be something to latch onto. But I was in it just to hey, as long as I can get to destroy my guitar, I'm having a blast.
Right. No question.
There was no way we were going to recoup that. That was insane. It was like we were part of Nancy Berry's special projects. We were in a tour bus. She didn't want us in a van. And, we toured as much as we could in the States. And as soon as we got to Europe, it's like, that was just the most fun because, we were playing festivals and there were kids that got it. Like they were freaking out that, when we'd show up. So that was a cool thing. But you spend $2 million on a marketing campaign, you sell 35,000 records worldwide. It's not a success.
Right.
This is for the proof. This is for the lover. Soaking in the truth. This is for the liar. This is for the dream. This is for America. Burning in the sea. Kill them! Kill them! Come on! Kill them! Kill them! This is for the treason. This is for the speed. All the money coming in the mouths of the meek. This is for the present. This is for the bomb. This is for the reasons of all. Come on, America! Come on, America! Come on, America!
Right, no question, man. So Paula, at what point and what was it that led you from being in the band to being behind the scenes and becoming an engineer? Was it just a love for it when you were doing it, or?
Well, so when I first met Casey, he was straight edge.
Okay.
And he was a super cool dude to hang out. He turned me on to so much music. And we rehearsed a lot. I dug where he was coming from. I'd go to work. I had a groovy day job, and show up at rehearsal, and he'd write a couple more jams, and we'd learn those and throw those on we had this giant dry erase board, and we just go through all these 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 songs, throughout the week, and we had something to do. And then hey, we've got a show at the barn, or we're going to open up for Deftones, wherever, or we're going to do this show down here. And it's like, all right, cool. And we were always prepared for something. Then we get down to we're trying to record the second record for Virgin, the follow-up to We've Come for Your Parents, and the 9/11 just happened, right? So the world is kind of getting crazy. And then Virgin, or EMI, purchased this deal with Mariah Carey for $22 million, non-recoupable. And Casey was kind of he's kind of he's drinking, he's chomping on pills, he's doing all he's just kind of going down his own path, and kind of alienating the band. And so we're working our asses off trying to get this last record recorded at Sound City. And Ross and Mike Frazier, the engineer, had to put the band on hold for 2 weeks. They needed to go back and remix a record for, I think it was called Vex Red. I don't know if you know that band. Oh, so anyways, so I was like, Casey, get out of town, go visit your folks, relax, step away from this.
Right.
You need it. And anyway, so, all of a sudden he's hammering the studio manager, hey, well, if I want to stay here and record while they're gone, can I get a deal? And I was like, don't do it.
Right.
I'm like, just go away. And, he just wouldn't. So we had this big powwow, and he basically just showed his cards that it was mostly only about him from then on out. And we were just the coattail riders trying to, soak up, the massive amounts of money we weren't making. So, I was like, well, you know what? Then I see where this is going, and I don't need to be part of this anymore. It's like I was in the band for 7 years prior to that point, and, I'm going to step away. And, so the next day I call up the studio manager, and I'm like, hey, so, I've been talking with Mike Terry, was the assistant on our session. I've been talking with Mike Terry about, maybe doing interning. I'd love to come down to the studio and work. Do I need to bring down a resume? And she says, you're hired. You can start when they leave. So that was Siobhan O'Brien over at Sound City. And so I waited, and I don't know if you ever did something for 7 years, every single day of your life, every single day for 7 years, then all of a sudden let it go. You do this free fall, and you kind of take a personal inventory of what's happening in your life, and just, look at all the pieces falling around, and kind of, figure out what you're going to do. So I just, I made the right decision, and, it's not like they went on to become, the next Foo Fighters or anything. They just, kind of, they were, imploded. And, there were so many people I know that are like, do you know, blah, 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 they were in Amen. I'm like, no, I've lost count after, Rich and, Matt Montgomery, and, right. I don't know who is in the band. So, and I love those guys. It's like Sonny and Larkin. It's like, sharing the stage with those guys, and, destroying every night that we could. That was the most fun in my life. That was just the most amazing time. And I felt like I was really, doing something that I loved. And that's, but at the same time, I was still doing that. I'm, every day, I just worked, back-to-back gigs, and it's like, it's all great music, and it's, I love it, every single part of it. I even do it at home.
Sure. No doubt. Well, Paul, you obviously made the right choice, because you're getting hired by the biggest of the big. I mean, you're obviously very good at it. I'll just put it that way. You're not getting Slipknot, Stone Sour, Alice in Chains, Cantrell, Death Angel. You know, the list is huge, and it's all big name bands. You're not getting that if you're not very good at what you do. So
Yeah.
what was it for you? What told you that you were good at it, and what tells other people now that you're good at it?
Well, it's a, I kind of gravitated towards this, like back in Amen, I'd set up the recording setup, and we'd do the demos, and Casey got like this digital recorder, and I'm like learning that thing and trying to make sense of that, and, doing programming or bouncing stuff from tape or whatever. And so it just kind of made sense. And, being in the studio, there's a hierarchy. Like the assistant's there to make the engineer look like a genius, and the engineer's there to make the producer look like a genius, and the producer's there to make the band look like the most amazing thing on the planet. So it's you find your place, and you don't speak out of turn. Really, you just kind of like sit there and listen and do your job, and like really kind of take stay 2 steps ahead of what's happening all the time. And it's not just like, hey, I'm an engineer, and kick your feet up and like check me out. It's not like that at all. It's like you're paying attention from the second you step through the door till the second you leave. And then when you're at home, you're thinking about, oh, I could have done this to save time on that, or this could have been a more efficient way to capture this setup. So it's just having, I guess, like an engineer brain. But it's, I was so lucky. And it's like, I don't know if you guys realize this, I jumped off the Amen ship just as I turned 32, and that's a little late to jump into start at the runner desk at a recording studio. But I never took it for granted, because I knew there were kids that would kill to get their foot in the door, to sit where I was sitting, to learn what I was about to learn for the next 6 years. Either being a runner, shadowing the assistant, being an assistant engineer, and engineering, and just watching all my heroes, do their thing at that studio on that desk. It's just, I heard, 10 different ways to do a drum kit or guitars, or, just tons of different angles of, to use that room in, creative ways. So, and I store all that stuff in my head. So it's, when Nick calls me, that's how I got scooped up out of Sound City. I got to assist on a session with Nick Raskulinecz, and he was like, fuck, this guy's kick ass. And then his engineer bailed on him, and he was doing Stone Sour at 606. And he was like, dude, how do you feel about coming down to 606 and help me finish this record? And I was like, fuck yeah. Plus, I know half those guys from, Slipknot, because that's, all we did was tour Slipknot back in the early days.
Sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, like you said, you just brought up, Sound City Studios, obviously infamous place there in Van Nuys. I used to, jam there myself. Great place to play. It's just got such a rich history. Now, these days, you're over at Dave's Room there on Lancashire in North Harley, correct? Yeah. And what's great? I mean, the Valley just has so many great studios. Uncle Studios is another great one that's been there forever. But what's great, what I think is kind of cool these days in terms of now studios is, long gone are the days with these massive recording budgets that these labels are just throwing out there like they used to, but and it seems like artists these days, I mean, like I said, even big name artists are recording at the same places now where the average musician records with their fledgling bands and projects. Talk a little bit about how much that really benefits a place like Dave's Room, the fact that there aren't these massive budgets anymore, and where now it's common to record, say, Jerry Cantrell's record at the same place that, like I said, just a smaller, average musician record at. I mean, it's good to know. I think that, the big boys are recording at sort of the same place that, the hero, where these, up and coming musicians are recording, and it's their heroes. And, I think it's just nothing to me. I just think it's a positive for music, going forward, that the lesser known acts are also, playing these places, that also they're willing to then pay a higher price to record at the same place where a major artist does these days. Talk a little bit about that and working at Dave's Room these days.
Yeah. So, so I took over Dave's Room with my partner, David Spring, and it was, a good friend of mine, Dave Bianco's spot. like, you know, he saved it from the bulldozers. It was a place that used to be called Mama Joe's. It was in really bad shape, but this place, Mama Joe's, was built as a studio in 1970. And that place competed with A&M and Ocean Way and Cello, which is now East West, like all these giant studios out in Hollywood. And, you know, there's pictures of like some, Stanley Jordan and George Duke, you know, doing their trio there. And, then there's bands like Ambrosia did all their yacht rock stuff there for years.
Nice.
But it's a great studio. Like you walk in, all the walls are like 1.5 feet thick, and there's a line of sight to track live, which is kind of like the luxury thing right now, because bands right now just they'll track drums, they'll track bass, they'll track guitars, they'll put their vocals on and, you know, get it mixed, and, you know, then they go out and tour. But this is a spot where you can track live and have, like, you know, half your record done in 3 or 4 days, and then do your overdubs, do your vocals wherever, and you've got a really great sounding, great feeling record instead of building it piece by piece, if that makes any sense.
Sure,
You know, we're a mom and pop situation, so we're really flexible on our rates, and we're highly competitive. And you know, because I'm working with Cantrell, it's like, hey, we've got 11 days to do all the guitars, and then we set up and did vocals at his house. But you know, it's just, you know, budget. It's like, you know, hey, we've got 11 days, let's do this. You know, that's lightning speed for him, because Alice in Chains records take like 3 to 6 months to finish.
Sure.
You know, so 11 days to get all the guitars was mind blowing. And then we set up at his house, and, you know, then we took our time, because that was during COVID. And, you know, it's like, oh, my throat's funny, or I don't, you know, my nose is runny, and I don't feel so great. And it's like, you know, it's the allergies. But, you know, we're being cautious. But yeah, so you know, hey, if a big rock band, you know, Kiss comes into our studio too. Paul Stanley did his Soul Station thing at our studio. And you know, but, you know, we've got Shooter Jennings showing up a lot with bringing bands, and it's awesome. And then we also get, like, you know, bands that, you know, they just want to do a cool record, and they either find me or Sprang, and you know, we work out a deal, and, you know, hey, come on in, let's record. And that is that easy. You know, so, you know, a lot of bands, it's like, you know, hey, you know, this isn't just a garage with a couple of mics and, you know, and a built-in engineer. It's a space, and you have to hire everybody. You don't have a producer, then you don't have a producer. You have an engineer because you need one. So you can't just show up and, like, you know, hey, I've got 40 minutes worth of music I need to record. So, you know, I think I can get my album done in 2 hours. It's like, it doesn't work that way, because somebody's going to say, hey, you're out of tune. And, you know, eventually somebody's gonna go, hey, I can't hear something in my headphones, and that always takes time. But you know, it's a little unrealistic, but you know, it can be done. It's not going to sound great.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Absolutely, man. Well, you know, you brought up obviously a big name just a second ago, Nick Raskulinecz. Obviously, you've been working alongside him on just numerous, you know, iconic records over the years. In your opinion, what is it about Nick that just makes him really just one of the top, I mean, few producers really in rock and metal in the world at this point? I mean, he's as big as there is right now, and you know, in music. What is it about him? What have you really, I guess, you know, have been able to learn or pick apart from him over the years that's really helped you flourish, not only as an engineer, but now also as a producer?
Yeah, well, one, and, you know, and he kind of shows it. He's a huge music fan. Like, just, he's like the biggest music fan. Like, he loves music, and his favorite, you know, it's like Rush, Rat. Like, Rat is his desert island band. Can you hear that? Can you hear that noise?
I did hear that a little bit. Yeah, it's okay.
Here, let me.
It's all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm having an addition, and these guys are, you know, they show up when they want to show up, and it's going to start in November. So, anyways, yeah. So, one, he is, you know, he's just the biggest music fan, and he loves music, and he wants, you know, and he's just a hilarious guy, and he's a great hang. And like when you meet him, and he's a giant guy too. when you meet him and he starts talking to you, you're like, all right, I trust this guy. Because he made, well, one, you can hear it in his voice, you can hear the passion coming out, and he's done it all. Like, he's heard it and seen it all, and he has a vision for your music. So that's where, like when he got to do that Rush record, which is like, I remember he had an interview. He's like, dude, my dream band to produce would be Rush. And then next thing you know, no doubt, like the year after that interview, he gets a call from Rush. Wow. And he does Snakes and Arrows. And he got Neil sweating in the studio and like pushing and like, throwing ideas at him. Like, he's super creative also, by the way. And he's just throwing ideas at him. I wasn't there. I just heard the stories. And he's getting him to sweat. And, I guess, they do a take. And then he goes out there, talks to Neil. It's like, I'm going to have you do that again. He comes back in the studio and Geddy's laughing. He's like, what's so funny? He's like, nobody's ever told Neil to do it again.
Wow.
So, nice. But, because Nick wants the bar super high. Period.
Right.
It's like, you got to get over that bar. It's like, hey, yeah, it could be, if you do it here, he can get it there, but he wants you to perform it there. So I get it. And, he's super talented, like just sitting there and listening and really paying attention to each, chord, every note, every, hit, every, whatever it is, he's paying attention, and he has a vision for every single piece of it.
There's got to be a voice that sort of once in a while creeps into you that says to yourself, I think it would be better if maybe it was done this way, right? Is Nick the kind of guy who's sort of, set in his laurels where, he it's just his way, the highway, or does he, take advice from, other engineers like yourself who work, alongside him?
No, yeah. So, we're both Sound City guys. So we both came up at Sound City. We're both we're familiar with the process, and we're, and I learned a lot from him. So I know what he wants. And I know how he'll want to get it. But if I see a way like, hey, we're having an issue with this, we should try to do this. And, he's totally open-minded. But, sometimes an artist is like, I want my, I need this to happen. And it's like, okay, well, then we'll do it that way. Like, like when we're doing Deftones and Stefan wanted to play through his guitar rig. And, Nick and I are just kind of looking at each other like, well, okay, so you're going to send his guitar signal into his computer. That is going to be offset by the samples it takes to convert. Then it's going to spit out, and that takes samples to convert. And then the phase alignment with what he's splitting off to the real amps is going to be a little different. So that was kind of like, it's like, okay, well, this isn't optimal for us, but we'll make it work because Stefan has a vision for his guitar sound, and he wants it to be this way. So, we did it and we worked around it, and it was a little tough, but I mean, as soon as Stefan got out on the floor, he played it once and it was pretty flawless. And Nick and I just looked at each other like, okay, hey, well, how about one more for safety? So, Stefan knows what he's doing.
Very cool.
Right on, man. Well, Paul, one of the things that I'm always fascinated with is when you work with these artists, I'm assuming this, so tell me if I'm wrong. I assume when you work, especially with artists like an Alice in Chains, when you work with Alice in Chains, there's an expectation from yourself going in on what it's going to sound like. Probably even before you hear the songs, you sort of know what Alice in Chains is. But like the last two records that Alice in Chains did, they went in some interesting and new and different directions. And I guess my question for you is, as an engineer, as a producer, or as a mixer, all three, how much communication and back and forth do you have to have before any recording starts so that everybody understands what you're trying to capture?
So, okay. So that first Alice in Chains, I didn't hear anything until I stepped into the recording studio. So that was, I'm just like, wow. Nick calls me up. I'm out on vacation. And he's like, dude, how do you feel about working on an Alice in Chains record? I'm like, that sounds amazing. When? And, so, I didn't hear any music, and he doesn't let me hear any music. Same with like Coheed and Cambria, like pretty much every single band we work with, he's the only one that's working on the demos, listening, doing the arrangements. And then when I step in, that's when I get put to work. And especially for Alice in Chains, it's like, holy smokes. It's like, like dirt. it's like that's the high watermark for guitar tone. And, you know, it's like, in Jerry is, you know, I'm just like, holy fuck. So, you know, that was a trip, you know, setting up all the amps and getting his sound together before Jerry started cutting guitars. Cause, you know, what a terrifying place to be if you're not up to par. But, you know, Nick and I, we dial up these amps, we get these sounds happening. We, you know, we're checking it out with his Les Paul. We put the Rampage on, and it's like, fuck, there it is. And, you know, just whatever he's got, pickups or that neck or the alder body or whatever it's made out of, you know, just, it has this snap, this bite, this growl, this, you know, through all these different amps, it has this particular sound. So, you know, Jerry came in that next day and put his guitar on, and he turned around with a big smile, and we're like, oh, whew. You know, he loves it, you know, great. But, you know, not like I wouldn't have these like moments when I'm going to sleep, you know, during that record going, who the fuck am I? It's like, that's a guitar god. Why the fuck am I recording him? But anyway, just calm down. Yeah. And, you know, and then, but for the rest, yeah, I don't get to hear the music unless I'm producing it. And that way, and then I have a bigger, you know, a broader picture of what the palette's going to look like on the record. Like for Cantrell's solo record, you know, we were doing demos, and I'm picking out guitar sounds for different sections with him. And, you know, like, hey, we need something chimey here. Let's use time, like let's get like an AC30 type of thing. And, or, you know, let's get like a, you know, JMP, like not full throttle, you know, distorted sound. And, you know, I really mapped out every single song. And then when it came time to do the record, you know, and track it in 11 days, it was already, you know, like most of the work, we didn't have to, you know, we didn't have to hunt around and figure out what was going to happen. I knew exactly where to go to get these sounds, and it happened pretty quick. So I think that's it. You know, if you have the time to do that, it makes your studio time way more efficient.
Sure. Yeah. The other contrast to that, I think, would be a guy like Corey Taylor, who comes with a different sound from band to band, you know, and sometimes even within the band, he comes with different, you know, some of the Stone Sour stuff is different from song to song. So how do you attack like vocals for a Stone Sour and keep that focused toward what he's going for and not allow it to get too Slipknotty, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, well, I think Corey kind of like, you know, filters that out for himself because he is writing that stuff. He's writing the lyrics. You know, it's like you have, you know, the records I worked on, Roy wasn't in the band on the first one, on the, you know, the first one I worked on them with. But, you know, Roy Mayorga came in with songs on, you know, Audio Secrecy, and, you know, Jim Root and Josh Rand as well. And so, and Sean Economaki was still in the band. So I'm not sure how much he was writing, but I know Corey would just roll in and he had an acoustic song and it would get turned into a rock song. So, you know, he's definitely bringing it. But yeah, so that's kind of the beauty of that band is, you know, all the songwriters are contributing and they're all making the record. So the one, you know, the one thread that goes through the whole thing is his voice. And, you know, I think that's, you know, and whether it's a mellow song or over the top, I think he steers it clear from Slipknot. You know, obviously I don't think there is one acoustic guitar on any Slipknot song.
Right. No. Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, for somebody that has done basically the big three phases of production, mixing and engineering and producing, how do you not end up blurring the lines? Like, you know, my thought is always, as a producer, now that you've produced music, you would probably bring some of that knowledge to the engineering when you're doing engineering on the next record, because you sort of know how to work with the musicians a little more now to get the boat. So how do you draw the lines, or do you not draw the lines? And do the people that, like, if you're doing an engineering job, does the producer lean on you because they know that you also have the skill as an engineer?
You know, it's like being able to wear all those hats, I think ultimately helps. Like right now I'm working on a project with Jim Scott, and, you know, he's he's a legend himself. I don't know if you know Jim Scott, but so he doesn't know Pro Tools, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
he's all analog on the desk. He's got like way more needs than anybody should have, and and he's fantastic at it. And then he'll ask me like, hey, can we sort this out, or can we do that? And it's like, yeah, sure. It's like, taking like these reels from like 91 and like, they're already transferred and like, building a click track out of a live performance. It's like, I can do that. But, it's like, as a producer, and I wear all the hats, and when I'm producing a band I'm working with, I am the engineer, and I am shaping that record from the beginning because I know how I'm going to mix it. I know I have a vision from the get-go of where I want it to end up. So, I think it all helps. It's like, I don't know if you've noticed, budgets haven't gotten any bigger, so I can't really hire an engineer yet, but it'd be nice.
Right.
Well, Paul, just sticking with the producing, topic here. I mean, what's your approach overall, just in general, I guess, to producing, to compare it to recording and engineering? For example, like we recently interviewed the producer Randy Burns, who was obviously the guy who did all those great 80s thrash, death, and crossover metal records with Megadeth and Suicidal. He said that with his approach to producing, he looked at himself more as providing sort of like the canvas for the artist, and the rest was all them. He didn't really suggest changes of much of anything, and it was just he looked at himself, he says, more as a resource for the band when they choose to use him in that regard. But he didn't really try to go in and change much of what the band was doing. For yourself as a producer, I mean, do you have a similar approach to the way you produce, as like I said, say you do with engineering recording, or do you enjoy sort of getting your hands in there and trying to maybe sort of mold a band instead of just going, along with what they want to do?
Well, yeah. So my approach, and this is for me, is I want the band to be the best version of them. It's like their name is the biggest name on the record, not my name. And it's like, I don't want to shape their record into something that's not them. And so, my approach is, hey, this is all great. I have some suggestions. They're always suggestions. Hey, let's shorten this part, or hey, let's move. This is the chorus. Like this, what you're calling a verse is the chorus. Let's move that, and let's create, creating an arrangement that makes sense. It's like, if I turn around to the artist, I'm like, what is this section? Oh, I guess that would be called. I'm like, well, that's what your listener is going to be wondering. So let's iron that out now. So, so you're just making things make sense and musical and flow, not correctly, but in a manner that like escalates. And so, I don't want to, I'm working with this band Filth is Eternal from Seattle. And, and the big thing is I don't want them to sound like any of the bands I've recorded. I want them to sound like them. And, the guitar player shows up and he's got like all like, I record all sorts of amps. It's like, Trivium is, all 5150s. And, Jerry uses pretty much every amp. But this guy brought in like the most Mesa boogies I'd ever seen. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And, it was just kind of bend my ear in a weird way, because I'm always like leaning on JMPs and other like high watts and AC30s or Bogners or something. And, then I get these, boogies, and I used to have a triple rectifier in Amen. And, but, I'm like, okay, let me wrap my head around this. And, and it's definitely a sound, and it's thick, and it's like, all right, I'm not going to take that away from you, but hey, let's add this one over here.
Nice. Right.
That's a good way to put it in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to definitely talk about some of the records you've worked on, obviously, over the years.
Sure.
I mean, when I look at your resume, like, it's really hard to kind of pick out because there's so many, but one that definitely stands out, obviously, was the second Ghost record. I remember reading an interesting story on that record where I know it was recorded in Tennessee. I remember reading something to the effect with, I remember the band couldn't find a choir to perform on the record. I believe, because in Tennessee, the choirs they weren't down with the satanic lyrics, I guess, in the music, and thus they had to obviously go back to LA, and where of course LA is no problem with that stuff. But just because I know obviously Tobias Forge is a guy who's kind of been known as someone who's been definitely a little bit challenging to work with in the studio. What was just your overall experience working with him and such a unique artist like him and the band Ghost?
Yeah, so you know, that was a total joy working with that band. I remember we were wrapping up the Devil Put Dinosaurs Here with Alice in Chains, and we got the demos, and I was like, this is great. It's like they're hanging a left on the metal scene, like really hard. And at the same time, it's like the lyrics are just so satanic, it's almost comical. But it's like their music was kind of beautiful at the same time. You know, their first record was a lot more, you know, just it was heavier. And this one was just a little bit more laid back, a little bit more space, and a lot more keyboards and or organ. And I just thought it was a fun and amazing record. You know, when the band showed up, they showed up in shifts, but it was like a democratic, like production. Like the guitar players were heavily involved in the guitar sound and creating the keyboard sounds and you know, and making sure like parts worked. But you know, and then, you know, I left when they were doing vocals back to LA, and, you know, Nick wrapped the record up, and then that is a true story. Like they'd get this choir to show up at the studio, and the choir looks at the lyrics and they're like, I don't want to do my hick voice, but, you know, well, we can't sing these lyrics. And so, you know, so they had to stop and, you know, abort that thing. And, you know, we set up at the Glendale, in Glendale, called Bridge Recorders. And David Campbell, who, you know, we usually get for our, you know, like Evanescence and Rush, he does like all the string arrangements. And I don't know if you know David Campbell, that's Beck's dad.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that. Okay.
And
Wow.
Yeah. And he's, you know, he is amazing, and he's got a really unique way of doing his thing. And so, yeah, he put together this 28-piece choir, and I showed up and I opened my laptop like we're doing now, except, you know, I've got Nick on Zoom, and Nick's got Tobias on, not, you know, on FaceTime, and Nick's got Tobias on FaceTime in Sweden. So we're going, you know, from LA to Tennessee to Sweden.
Wow.
And, you know, doing this choir. And, you know, weirdly enough, I just stumbled on this because this is, I want to get a plaque for this, but this is the score for that session.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
And this is what the choir sang. It's 4 pages long.
Wow.
Wow. Damn.
It's,
holy shit.
It's, you know, it's just, it's pretty impressive. And David Campbell, that's what he does. He does this.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I just need to get that in a frame. But
Nice.
yeah. So, and he did the same thing with Evanescence. So we flew to New York, and, you know, and that's, I really, again, a lot of respect for Amy when she walked up to David and she looked at the score, and she's like, you know, you need to watch out for this. And she starts, and she really dove in there, and she knew what she was doing, and she knew what she was talking about, and amended his manuscript paper. And I was like, wow. I'm like, she's a badass. I'm like, all right.
Nice.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to get that thing framed. Absolutely, man. That thing is special. No doubt.
There's even pencil markings on this.
Oh, wow. Nice. That's really cool.
And all the lyrics are on there and everything.
Wow.
Yeah. Very cool, man. That's awesome, man. Yeah.
Nice.
That's a good piece there.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
So my next question, this is a band I know not maybe a lot of people know too much about, but I was a really big fan of this band out of LA, who I don't really had a great feature, and then they just kind of disappeared and went nowhere. Was Year Long Disaster. You know, and that of course featured Daniel Davies, who's the son of the great Kinks guitarist Dave Davies. Obviously had Rich Mullins from Karma to Burn, drummer Brad Hargreaves, he was from Third Eye Blind. They put out 2 great records. I love the record that you did with them. That was the best one, you know, Black Magic, All Mysteries Revealed. You know, I know that, like I said, I know Daniel, he was with Karma to Burn for a bit, then CKY, but he just kind of fell off the face of the earth. I don't know what happened to him. Talk a bit about working with that band, who, like I said, they started out so hot in LA when I was there, and just, I mean, I you know, it happens. I know it's just, you know, the way the music business works. But I mean, do you even still talk to Davies? Is he still doing anything musically around LA?
No, he's doing great. Yeah. So, you know, I even had friends that played in that band, And
Oh,
so
okay.
I go see my friend Brian Brown, who, you know, after Amen, I joined this band Bluebird, and then he became a writing partner of mine, and we did all sorts of TV and movie music, and we did a bunch of music for Sonic Highways and like 94 pieces of music for that. And you know, so I actually met Daniel at one of our like music meetings, you know, with music supervisors. And I was like, "Oh, hey man, how you doing?" He's got his, after a year long, he kind of like got his shit together, and he was composing and doing stuff for TV and movies. And but I didn't realize, I think his dad is the director.
Oh, the John Carpenter, right?
Carpenter, John
John
Carpenter.
Carpenter. Yeah.
And they did a soundtrack record, or they did a record of the soundtracks, and then they toured it from John's movies. And so he's been doing stuff like that lately.
Oh,
and
okay.
I chime in on him every now and again, but I mixed a thing, and then it was pretty synth heavy. It was pretty wild, but super cool. Like, he's a super creative guy. But that session was pretty fun. It was quick. I think it was only like 2 weeks. But those guys would track live at Sound City. So we set up at Studio A, and we track live, get the basic tracks together. And, classic Nick, he had all the demos beforehand, ironed out the arrangements. And then, by the time they got to Sound City, when we were all set up, we'd go ahead and track those guys. And then we moved into Studio B. And, it was just a lot of work. I can't say that it was like a lot of hanging around and partying and chatting. It was just, straight to business. It's like we weren't there to hang out. They were spending a lot of money, and this is kind of when the beginning of budgets really disappearing. Like, hey, that one just got cut in half, and that one that just got cut in half again. So we did a great record, and then Nick mixed it, and they toured it, and I don't know why it didn't have more success. I mean, he's highly entertaining to watch, and he's a great guitar player, and great band, period. And so I hope he keeps doing stuff, because I'd like to hear more.
Yeah,
sure, certainly, man. Well, Paul, and this is just looking at your resume, so it could very much be not true. It's just the way it's worked out, but it seems like on some level you are kind of a vocal expert. And what I mean by that is all of the artists that you work, or most of the artists that you work, are very unique vocalists, whether it's Cantrell and Duvall, Mark Sullivan of Stavacre, Corey Taylor. These are all guys that have very unique voices. And I can't imagine that anybody could just produce or mix or engineer them. I have to imagine that there's something that you hear specifically, or you and Nick hear, that helps bring out the best of guys that do not have a common voice. So do you think that that's true? And if so, what is it about you that you pick up on vocal nuances?
Okay, so I heard part of that. Give me the last couple of sentences there, because that one just totally
okay. No, I just think that you bring out the best on vocals that are not straightforward average vocals. You work with vocalists that are very unique, whether it's Mark Solomon or Duvall and Cantrell, etc. Do you think that there's something about you that you hear, or you and Nick hear, that really blows up vocalists' nuances?
Well, okay, so you named, okay, so there's a reason why all those guys are in that list. They're all amazing singers, like, and they all have like different tonalities. And like Mark Solomon, it's like, he's just a self-taught dude that just can just, his pitch is just on point, and he has like a unique sound. And I don't want to cover that up, so I'm going to use a mic that's going to capture that. And it's all about mic placement and choice, but also like hey, I'm not going to use that pre that's going to drive that thing to death or really squash them down, or I want it to be intelligible. And I don't know if you heard their version of Burn the Witch or the Sia cover. I'm amazed. I'm in the room, recording him. And, same with William and Cantrell. It's like, Nick has a specific, you get to Nick's level and, you buy these really expensive and they're worth every penny, mic pre's and microphones. And, for Nick, for Will and Jerry on the Alice in Chains stuff, we use a Bach 251 and that and an SM7. Which is, that's like the best $400 you're ever going to spend for a vocal mic. That's very close. The one you
this
have
is
there,
one
Chris.
right here.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So, but it's the talent those guys bring, and then it's up to us to, like I can work with Jerry, all day long, but he's got he's got about 45 minutes to an hour and a half of usable vocal. So it's up to me to all right, Jerry, you're done.
Okay.
Call him on it. I'm like, unless it's like, hey, are you doing that scratchy thing on purpose? And then he'll be like, yeah, I'm just trying to put some touch on it. I'm like, oh, okay. I just want to make sure. So I was about to call it. Right? And I respect that. Because the quality of voice is hugely important, and it's like, and if it, I could let all the top end roll off of his voice and just have something haggard and try to mix it later, but that's not what we want to do. We want it. The quality voice has to be there, and and Will is just the guy is so over the top, and his range is so wide. It's it's pretty insane. And then, same with Mark. It's like, that guy just bellows and it's so strong, I've just been lucky, I've got a project I'm working on, which is the totally opposite. But I embrace it because there's a fragility to it where it's almost falling apart. And I think that's uniquely human. And I want to hear that. I relate to it.
Sure. Definitely.
And I hope when this project comes out that everybody does too.
Absolutely. Nice. Well, speaking of records that come out, here's one that didn't come out, and I'm hoping somehow, some way we may hear it someday, but you worked on it, so maybe you could tell us about it. Deadland Ritual.
Sure.
Super group. Everybody was waiting for everybody was waiting for it, and it just fell apart. So is there a full record, and should we even hear it, I guess?
This session, and Greg Fiddleman brought me onto this, and he's another Sound City guy, and and he's got a funny sense of humor, and he gets in the studio and he's blowing his top off, and but it's like in a tongue-in-cheek way. But this was like my first or second session with him, and I'm in the studio with Geezer Butler, Steve Stevens, and Matt Sorum. And, and then Frankie would show up later, but I'm like, I was so nervous for some reason. It was so weird and out of character for me. It's like my hands were all sweaty, and I'm like, and we're doing live takes. Like they're tracking live. There's no click. I'm keeping we're changing tempos for different spots, and there's, okay, that's a no tempo thing. This is a tempo thing. And I'm trying to keep track of these giant, massive sessions. And I remember, so we jumped from one tempo to another, and then they're like, nah, that's not going to work. Let's go back to the other one. And I spaced and typed in the start time for the tempo we were not going to do anymore. And we did a whole take, and I'm like, because I don't know why I was so nervous, Geezer, I think. And, so I, hey, Greg, I need to talk to you. He's like, yeah, what's up? And this is at Henson, it's super expensive, awesome studio. I'm like, look, I don't know why I'm so nervous, but, I'm going to man up. That wasn't the right take. That was the wrong tempo. And I apologize. But, and he's like, dude, don't worry. so, I'm just like, oh my God, those guys. But yeah, what a fantastic sounding record. I don't know what happened, but, it was, you know, I don't know if they can get a label behind it, because I think Matt was funding that one himself.
Yeah.
So that
I mean,
might have been a thing.
I saw that they announced kind of individually. They all said, "Yeah, that project's pretty much dead." And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's a record a lot of people would want to hear.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you
Well, there's
know,
an EP, right? There's the EP came out, or is it just 2 singles?
just 2 singles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the
I think there's a
pandemic
couple
hit.
more. Yeah, I think there's a couple more songs that didn't get released, but yeah, they're out there. But yeah, that'd be cool. I mean, like, you know, I mean, God, Steve Stevens, what a play! All those guys, what great players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know I mean, they tracked live, and then Steve would just come in and double his guitar.
Wow.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's such an underrated guitarist, Steve Stevens. People,
You know,
because he was with Billy Idol, more of a pop, guitarist. People don't realize how good that guy really is. You know, he's
he was on my radar coming up as, you know, I was a shredder when I was a kid. It was like, you know, Eddie Van Halen was the guy that got me to pick up a guitar, and I'm like, whatever that was happening over there, it's like, I need to figure that out and destroy my guitar. And then and then, you know, but you know, then it was Yngwie and everybody else, and Ronnie Tekro and from TNT, and you know, like all these, you know, just shredders. And then, you know, then Steve Stevens, I was like, then I got his solo record, and I'm like, God, this guy's fantastic too. And you know, and Steve Morris and all those guys. You know, I was just a huge fan. But yeah, and then seeing him in person, just like, holy smokes.
Yeah, he rips, man, no doubt. Well, Paul, man, you know, we could do this all day long, man. There's so much of you. We'll definitely have to get you back on to talk more about, you know, all these great records you worked on. But before we wrap things up here, I just wanted to go ahead and I guess let the listeners and all those musicians out there know if they want to work with you at Dave's Room and there in in North Hollywood. How could people get in touch with you, and where should they go to sort of just get in touch with you to, you know, possibly work with you in the future?
Oh yeah, they absolutely. You know, like my friend Eric Kluber from the band
Ironauts, yes.
Yeah, and you know, and they're a great example. You know, during that Fireball Ministry record, he's like, you know, hey, my buddy Eric, you know, is looking to, you know, cut some tracks. You know, are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, well, let me hear some stuff. And you know, I heard him, I met with them, and I was like, absolutely. And this is before Dave's Room. I had this little tiny production space at Angel City Drumworks, but I had, you know, a way to record everybody live. And, you know, so those guys would show up, and we would set up and, you know, jam it out over a weekend. And they could afford that. And then they'd come in, and Eric would come in for a couple of nights and finish the vocals. And I don't know if you heard all those EPs, but, you know, they didn't spend tens of thousands of dollars on that. It was, you know, way more reasonable. But absolutely, it's like they can reach through my website, paulfigmusic.com. And I have a manager. She, you know, helps. And, you know, I'm always like, you know, I know it's not the 90s, you know, and I'm not expecting that. But, you know, it's like, you know, studios do cost money. But, you know, hey, if a band can, you know, play their record in 40 minutes. You know, you'd be surprised once you get set up. You can have basic tracks for a song in 40 minutes. You know, you do the song like 3 or 4 or 5 times. You get your headphones together, and all of a sudden, everyone's like, they lose their red light fever, and you're coming to get. You know, the track is really coming together and feeling great. So you do that 3 songs a day. You can have a groovy record in 3 days. And then, you know, if they need to go someplace else to cut vocals, and because they can't afford to be in the studio, then, you know, there's always a way to work around that stuff.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, like to everybody out there, if you know, you got a Grammy nominated engineer right here who you could work with. So go check out paulfigmusic.com. And yeah, and just quickly, yes, want to thank, speaking Eric Kluber, thanks to him for connecting us to do this interview with you, Paul. It's been great, man, picking your brain and you haven't, you know, telling us your experiences working with these great artists. And like I said, we'll definitely have to do this again. Anything else you want to plug out there before we wrap it up, Paul?
No, not yet. The thing I'm working on right now is kind of like, you know, not public yet. So, you know, when we get together next.
Okay.
There we go.
I hope it's more sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whenever you're free, you're the busy one, so we're always available. So yeah, we'll be in touch, and we'll definitely make that happen. Like I said, there's a couple other records I wanted to talk to you, but like
Sure,
I said,
sure.
this goes on forever. But again, Paul, thanks so much for coming on, and yeah, we'll definitely talk to you soon again.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt and Chris.